Superheroes and villains are very entertaining, as there's nothing quite like a fight between two people with godlike superpowers. Though there are some powers that they have that just don't make any sense. Such as, how does Magneto move metals that are non-magnetic, when all he can do is control magnetic fields? He can't just control metal, it's just magnetism, so it doesn't really make sense. And how does Johnny Storm breathe when he's flamed on? Since the fire would burn away all the oxygen around him before he could reach his mouth, and then asphyxiate him until he was depowered or unconscious. Now, we all know these flaws are there, but we love comics and we love superheroes and the idea of having powers, so for the most part we just let these things go and enjoy the stories. But there are some powers that sound great, but really they just wouldn't work in real life, and this video is going to go over 5 of them. Number 5. Invisibility. Being invisible is a popular power, as we've all felt like just disappearing at one point or another in our lives. And when you're invisible, you can do anything you want, and no one will know it's you doing it. And you can go anywhere you want because no one can see you, so no one can stop you. But the problem with this power is that when you turn invisible, you become blind. You see, human eyes work with light going into our eyes and reflecting off the back of them. That's how we see. That reflection is important for us to be able to see our surroundings. But if you're invisible, then that light won't reflect off your eyes, it'll just pass right through you, and so you'd instantly become blind. And although this doesn't make the power completely useless, after all you can still disappear and hide from someone, but I think not being able to see would really ruin the power, as it wouldn't be nearly as useful. I mean, if you wanted to sneak in somewhere or steal something, then you'd have to memorise the exact route you'd have to take beforehand, otherwise you just wouldn't be able to get there. And memorising an entire route of a complex place is pretty difficult, especially if there's moving parts or other people going around, because you wouldn't be able to see them and you could walk straight into them. And if you turn invisible, there's also the factor that you might not be able to turn your clothes invisible. It could just be your power is to make your body invisible, so even hiding would be difficult, as you'd have to be naked all the time. Although with that being said, there are of course materials made in movies and comics that can turn invisible with a person, so you wouldn't technically have to be naked all the time. But whether materials like this could be made in the real world is another story, because nothing like that exists at all. So if you did have this superpower in the real world, then you'd have to be blind and naked to turn invisible and use it properly. So it wouldn't end up being a very useful power. Number 4. Super strength. Super strength is one of the most common superpowers, probably because it's something we all want at some point in our lives, especially when you're moving house. And fighting criminals is way easier when you're super strong. I mean, it's much easier to stand up for someone and stand up for justice when you know you can easily defeat the person you're facing without even breaking a sweat. And since most superheroes constantly get in fights, super strength does make a lot of sense for them, as it allows them to easily beat people who don't have super strength. And if the villain has super strength powers as well that could be the same or even stronger than yours, it does make for an interesting fight of watching you take them down. Just look at the fight in Deadpool 2, where Colossus, who has super strength, took down the Juggernaut, who still has super strength but on a way higher scale than Colossus does. And for the most part, having super strength would be pretty useful. The only problem would be that you would probably break everything around you. I mean, personally I'm a little heavy-handed and I can be a bit clumsy, and if I had this power, I know I would cause a lot of destruction, purely by accident. I'm always knocking things or walking into things, and if I was super strong, I'd be knocking those things over, and if I caught my arm or something on a door frame, I'd be knocking that door or the wall off. And if you grabbed a door to open it and you pulled too hard, you could easily rip the handle off the door, or just rip the door clean off the hinges. And if you did something as simple as just kicking or punching a wall in frustration, you'd either knock down the wall or possibly knock down the whole house. And say you're doing something every day like just going on a computer, and the mouse or keyboard stops working. Normally you just give them a little knock to see if you can get them working again, but if you did that little bang and you had super strength, then your hand would go through the computer's table. And there's also the factor of controlling it when you're asleep. I actually move around quite a lot in my sleep, and a lot of people do move in their sleep to a certain degree. It's quite a common thing. But if you moved in your sleep and you had super strength, even if you only moved a little, you could easily end up knocking your partner out of bed, and if you hit them hard enough you could actually break their bones and seriously hurt them. And this is actually very likely to happen to people. I mean, even if you just stubbed your toe on a coffee table while you're walking by it, you'd probably kick the coffee table across the room and break it into pieces. And you could never drink alcohol or do any drugs, because if you did and you blacked out and lost control, you could destroy a lot of stuff and potentially hurt a lot of people and go to jail for a very long time. So the biggest problem with this superpower is that it's very hard to control the super strength. And it's a lot of responsibility you'd have to take on, as a lot of things could go wrong and you'd always have to stay in control to make sure you didn't hurt anyone by accident. And keeping in control and staying responsible 24/7, well, that would get pretty old pretty quick. Number 3. Invulnerability. Again, this is one of the most popular powers for superheroes to have, because it means that they can't be hurt at all. And it is literally the perfect ability to have in a fight, as they can punch you as hard as they like, they're just going to end up breaking their hand. And again, this is a superpower that most people want at some point. I mean, who out of us actually enjoys being in pain? Pretty much no one. And one of the many superheroes to have this power is Superman, although he also of course has a lot of other powers. But his skin is knife-proof, bulletproof, and can even have an explosive device go off in his hands and be completely fine, not so much as a scratch or even a wince of pain.
Waiting is the worst part.
But the problem is, if you can't feel an explosive device or bullet hitting you, then how numb would your body constantly be? You wouldn't even be able to feel someone touch you, kiss you, or do anything to you. You wouldn't even be able to enjoy a warm shower, as the invulnerable can walk through lava and not feel a thing, so obviously hot water would be nothing to them. Of course, if you were